In this video, we're going to talk about some of the basic aspects of using vectors in R. As we talked about in a previous video, a vector is a single-dimensional set of data of the same type. The most basic way to create a vector in R is using the C function, which stands for combine. And the C function combines values into a vector or a list, depending on what the underlying data structure is. So here are three examples of commands that one could use to create vectors in R. This first is going to create a numeric vector in R. The second is going to create a character vector in R, while this third is going to create a logical vector in R. So what we're asked to do here in this your turn is execute the three commands above in the R console to see what you get. So this is already open in RStudio, so I'm just going to scroll down to where this code actually is. So I'll scroll down. And so here are the relevant commands. So I'm going to clear the R console using Control L on my PC. Probably should be Command L on a Mac. So I'm going to copy this, hit Control Enter, and you can see that the R console has executed this command and returned a vector with 6 numeric values. If I highlight this right here, hit Control Enter and run it in the console, then I get a character vector with 3 values, 1, 2, and 3. And then lastly here I have a logical vector, so I highlight that, hit Control Enter, and it returns a logical vector, true, true, false, and true. So this is not very exciting, but this is the most basic way of creating vectors in R. Now let's go back to the notebook here. And most of the time you actually would not create a vector in that way. You can do it for small examples, or especially for small reproducible examples. If you're trying to get help on someplace like Stack Overflow, you might include that a very small vector or data frame that you create so that the problem can be reproduced. But oftentimes you're going to, if you want to create a vector manually, you're actually going to be wanting to create some sort of patterned vector. So I don't know if this is actually a word, but I just mean a vector with a certain pattern. So R provides several functions for creating vectors following certain consistent pattern. So the two that I'm going to demonstrate here are the seq, which stands for sequence function, and that's used to create an equidistant series of numeric values. And then the rep function, which stands for replicate, and that's used to create a vector by replicating the values that you supply it. So let's just look at some examples of these different things. So seq 1, 10 is going to create a sequence of numbers from 1 to 10 in increments of 1 by default. You could also use the shorthand 1, 10, which will do the exact same thing as this. So by default, it just goes from 1 to 10 in increments of 1. You could use seq 1, 20, by equals 2. And so this by equals 2 means that you want the sequence to increment in values of 2. So the sequence is going to start at 1, go up to 20, and it's going to increment between those numbers in values of 2, or in increments of 2. And then the last example here is seq 10, 20, len equals 100. This refers to the length of the vector. So what this does is it creates a vector with values between 10 and 20, but then subdivides or determines the increments so that there's exactly 100 elements between 10 and 20, including both of those endpoints. The replicate function works slightly differently. So the rep function, you give it a vector, and then you can specify various arguments to tell the function how you want to replicate those values. So rep 1, 3, times equals 3 is going to take this vector 1, 3, which is going to be the sequence 1, 2, 3, and it's going to repeat it 3 times in a row. So you should get 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. On the other hand, if sometimes we have a vector that we want to replicate, but we don't want the number of elements to be repeated the exact same number of times, so you can actually pass a vector to the times argument so that each element of this vector corresponds to each element of this vector and tells this function how many times each value should be repeated. So if I had the vector here, treatment 1, treatment 2, and treatment 3, and then times equals 1, 2, 3, which is what 1, 3 represents, it means that treatment 1, the first value of this vector, will be repeated 1 time. Treatment 2, the second element of the vector, will be repeated 2 times, because that's the second element of this vector right here. And then treatment 3 is going to be repeated 3 times, since that is the last value in this vector right here. Lastly, you can use the each argument instead of times, but it does something slightly different. So if we use rep 1 colon 3, each equals 3, it's going to repeat each value in this vector 3 times each. So it's going to repeat 1 3 times, then 2 3 times, then 3 3 times. So in the your turn, what I want you to do is actually to execute these, I said 6 commands here, it should be 7. So execute these 7 different commands in R just to actually verify that you get what you expect. So I'm going to go back to my RStudio window here and scroll down so I can copy and paste these. So for this command right here, we are expecting 1, 2, 3, all the way up to 10, which is exactly what we get. This should produce the exact same thing. This, so sequence 1 to 20 by equals 2. We want to start our sequence at 1, increment it by 2, so we go up to 3, increment that by 2, up to 5, and so on. And so this is actually only going to run up to 19, because once we get to 19, we increment that by 2, we get 21, which is beyond the upper limit of our sequence. So we do in fact see 1, 3, 5, 7, and so on, all the way up to 19. And then lastly here, we have seq 10, 20, length equals 100. So this is going to have a vector, create a vector with values between 10 and 20 of length 100. And as I mentioned in a previous video, this right here indicates what element of this vector we're looking at. And so this is the 97th element, 98th element, 99th element, 100th element. So it goes from, or 20 is the largest value, 10 is the smallest value, and so it does in fact conform to what we expect. And if we look at the rep examples, we have rep 1 colon 3 times equals 3. So it should repeat the sequence 1, 2, 3 3 times. We have 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. In the second example here, we have treatment 1, treatment 2, and treatment 3. We want to repeat the first element 1 time, the second element 2 times, and the third element 3 times. And that's exactly what we get here. And then lastly, if we specify the each argument instead, then each element of this vector will be repeated this many times. So we should get 1, 1, 1, 2, 2, 2, 3, 3, 3, which is exactly what we get.